Hello everyone. For today's sketchbook warm-up and our class today, we are going to practice together using our value scale and knowledge of value to create a monochromatic landscape that gives us atmospheric perspective. So we are going to be picking our pencils up, our sketching pencils, and we're gonna do a black and white landscape to practice changing our pencil pressure so that the foreground is the darkest dark we see, and as we move back in space, the landscape starts to get lighter as we would look out into the distance in real life, and you would see that whatever is in the very farthest part of the picture, the background, it is the lightest. It starts to recede or look like it's going away in the background. And we're gonna apply the same thing with the color that we choose as well. So let's get started. So for our black and white, I would get our drawing pencils, whichever number you have that is the largest, B. So I have a 4B sitting next to me. If you have a 5B, grab that one. If you have a 4, make sure you have that one with you. And then also get the lightest pencil you have. So if it's the HB, grab the HB. If you have the 2B, that's fine. But you just need your highest one for the darkest darks, and then we're gonna use the lowest one we have to get the lighter values in there, and then we'll talk about the color after we finish our black and white monochromatic landscape with atmospheric perspective. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna turn our sketchbook to a blank piece of paper. And we're going to use our HB pencil to sketch 2 little boxes for our 2 landscapes. And remember, when we're sketching, it's really light, it's not permanent. This is just laying down the foundation of where we're going to be drawing. We're going to try to fit 2 boxes on our paper, and we're going to leave some room at the bottom because we're actually going to establish a value scale before we add our value to our drawing, because it's always good to practice and get warmed up before you start making your final piece. So we're going to treat today's warm-up like we are, yes, we're practicing, but we're also working to make sure we are applying our value and pencil pressure correctly. So even though it is practice, we want to practice correctly. So when you have your 2 boxes established, we are going to, as you can see over here on this piece of paper, I was practicing with my blue, just a quick little value scale. We're going to do the same thing underneath each box. So I'm going to just make a very long rectangle, like when we did our value scales last art class. And I'm going to divide it up first with the HB pencil, and then let's switch with the 4B, and we're going to use this because it will show our darks really quickly, and then we'll transition back to the HB. Even though for a flawless transition you would use multiple pencils, we're gonna just use these 2 for today. Okay, so I made 5 lines. Well, yeah, 5 lines. And then that one's not very even, that's okay. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna press, this is gonna be our darkest dark, so our deepest shadows, and then this will be the highlight. Which we won't have an extreme highlight, but just to show us the range from dark to light. And then it'd be a good idea to have your kneaded eraser with you. If you have it from your very first art kit that was given out, it's really great to use to even just apply a little light pressure to erase your marks to help us with our transition. If you have a different eraser, that will work too, but these are really great when working with our drawing pencils and for value. So we're gonna go to our darkest dark, and we're gonna color this box in super hard. So this is what our foreground will be, this darkest value of this right here. And then as we move over towards the light, we're gonna lighten up our pencil pressure. So remember, when you're changing your pencil pressure, your fingernails, you should see that they get lighter. You're pressing really, really hard. And if you are coloring on, or coloring, it's almost like we're coloring on the tip of your pencil, that's fine. You can still get a really dark, but if you tilt your pencil to the side and you start to use your pencil at an angle, this can apply a more even pencil mark and pressure as you're working your way down. So I'm pressing super hard and I'm gonna lighten up. And this box should be not as dark as the one we just did, but still pretty dark. So I'm going back over it. This one gets lighter. I don't love where I put my line, so I'm gonna just kind of add a little bit more to this one. And it would get lighter. And with this pencil, we can lighten our pressure so much, but it will still show a lot. So then we can transition to the HB and start putting an even lighter pressure until we don't really see it anymore. And then we can use this to go back over our darker values to blend them with our pencil. We're going to not use our finger or a Q-tip right now to blend. This is to practice our pencil pressure. So it is okay to use Q-tips, even like tissue paper, toilet paper, paper towels, or your finger, and blend the value, but we want to try to practice our pencil pressure and our control of our hand for this exercise. So it's okay if your transitions aren't super smooth. You can see the texture of the paper be rough. And then let go of your pencil, lighten it up off the page as you get closer to the light. And then if you wanted to use the eraser, instead of just swiping completely, the eraser we can think of like a drawing tool as well. So this is where if you did just kind of tap your eraser to get rid of those last kind of marks and almost blend it as a way to transition, then that'll work. So ideally, if we're squinting, it should be a flawless transition from dark. The shadow changes to get lighter, 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 and then it would be white. So when we are making our landscape, we can use this to reference what our layers should be. And if our lines disappeared on our scale, that's okay. But we're gonna have 6 layers in our landscape. So we'll refer to this for our 6 different layers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 would be this last box. And then the sky is technically a layer, but we're looking specifically at our land layers right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to our HB pencil, since we are going to use it to sketch our foundational picture. And for the sake of practice, let's use a landscape that we are familiar with as we look out into Washington, especially when it's a foggy day or rainy, or even at the nighttime, and you'll see the layers as you look out into the distance with the hills and the mountains and trees and so forth. So I'm just gonna pick some zigzag lines or curves to make it look like mountains. And remember, as we start in the foreground, this is the biggest layer, so they're gonna be the tallest. It's like we're right there up close with it. And then as we go to the middle ground, they start to recede. And then once we get to the background, they are super small. Anything in the very back of the background starts to get very small in the distance. I want to add a variation to make my landscape more interesting. So I'm trying not to make the zigzags or the curves for our hills or mountains be the exact same shape or the exact same size. So imagining as you're looking back, they do get smaller, so the spaces are starting to get smaller too. But there are some big peaks that stand out, so it's okay if you have one like this one I'm going to make big, but then it's going to transition down, go over, and then the very last, you're like looking out at the Cascades, kind of rocky, but they are still small, and that'll be our last layer. And this will be the lightest of the values. It's not going to be quite white though, but we'll get rid of this outline later with our eraser once we complete the transitions. So you're going to go back to your darkest value pencil you have. So we're going to go back to our 4B or the 5B, and this layer will be our darkest dark. It'll be in the shadow. So we're going to go ahead and fill this in. You're going to press really, really hard, and it's okay if your pencil isn't sharp for this. If you actually have been drawing at an angle and your pencil is flat, this will help you cover more ground of your drawing with a solid application, more smooth. And if you are worried about your pencil smudging or smearing, it's a good idea to get a second sheet of paper and make sure that you are holding it steady, and you could cover whatever you don't want to smear. Especially for the left-handed artists. I know we've talked about that throughout the year, depending on the way your page is oriented. And later on, I'll use this to cover this layer as well. So you might be applying a lot of pressure, like I just did in this area, but you can see that it's a little bit lighter than this area. So I'm going to go back over it. Try to get it to match the rest. You want a nice even coat of pencil. All right. Voila. So, just gonna sharpen my pencil just a little bit. Okay. Now that we have the foreground, we are going to go to the next area of our landscape, which we will aim for this value right here. So we're not going to press as hard as we did here. Get that out of our system, and then we'll just move into the next layer. And I can already tell that my layer needs to be a little darker. This isn't quite the correct transition, but I can start out light and always go back in and add more. So I am going to go back another layer of pencil. And I might have to do this throughout the drawing. I might not apply the layer right away. And as you move through the drawing, you'll notice it's a series of additions, not corrections, but everything you do affects the rest of your drawing or the rest of your art piece. So you have to refer back to all the other things that you've made, the decisions you've made on the paper, and then everything visually interacts with each other. That's pretty close. So I'm going to move to the next one, and I might come back and adjust to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to keep going and lighten my pressure for this next layer. I think this actually matches this. It's quite like that. And I want it to be this. I want it to be a little bit darker. So I'm gonna go over it one more time, but really softly. All right, and then I'm gonna move to the next one. But on this one is where we press really lightly, but then we're gonna transition to the HB, because even if I press lightly, I actually can kind of get it. But if you need to use the HB, you can. So I'm gonna use that just to make this one a little bit darker. We define this line. There we go. Oops. I think that one actually turned out okay. I'm gonna use my eraser to just lighten up those really harsh lines as we transition. So we almost want to not even touch our paper. Really, really soft pencil pressure. And it isn't a highlight because it's still in space. When we're doing value representing an object, then we would need a highlight or a shine, which would be this lightest light. But we wanted to keep this in mind for value when we're applying it to our landscape. But in physical space, when you're looking out at the mountains, they are not invisible, so we do need to give them not a highlight, but the very lightest shadow before it's nothing. And that's almost a little too dark. And I'm gonna go back in on this one. All right, so there we go. And I can see in the camera actually this transition is nice. These looks like there's a shadow over there, and I want this whole layer to be the lightest. So I'm gonna go back in and just dab it with the eraser just a little bit. And then if you were to add a shadow for the sky, you would be able to see that layer a little bit more. And you can see that in the colorful layer. I did do that, so that way we can see that last layer of the mountains a little bit more. But for this, let's just go ahead and leave it white so it does look like the full transition of the value scale for our practice today. When we see each other next week, we will complete this landscape with our choice of color together in class. So don't worry about this one right now. For today, make sure you take a picture of this. You can take a picture of the whole page or just the section, but definitely take a picture of this, turn it into our sketchbook warm-up with today's date, just like normal. However, I am going to ask that you pay attention to this once I give you credit for turning it in. I'm also going to use the annotate tool to draw or make marks on top of your submission inside of Schoology, so I can maybe point out some transitions like I was able to do while I'm looking at mine right now, and talk about how I might need to rework some areas, or we're seeing that the transition might not be as smooth as this. And so that way we can get feedback and learn how to address our pencil pressure or notice some things in our value transitions. So make sure you take a look at that on Schoology after you turn it in, and you'll see that I give you credit, and then there'll be a little comment at the bottom as well. So thanks for practicing value today. I know it can be tricky. I'm excited to see your work, and I hope you all have a fabulous weekend, and I'll see you next week.